So imagine you're walking down a virtual street, right? You're in this highly anticipated, massive budget video game.
Right, the kind that's been hyped for years.
Exactly. And you look down at a puddle on the asphalt. And I mean, the water is perfectly reflecting the neon signs above it.
The math calculating that light bouncing off the water is, computationally flawless.
Flawless. The resolution is this eye-watering 4K running at a blistering 60 frames per second. And the polygon count of the curb next to the puddle is probably in the millions.
Yeah, every technical specification tells you that this is the absolute pinnacle of digital reality.
Right. So why does your brain, within like milliseconds of looking at that screen, instantly scream that you are looking at cheap, soulless plastic?
It's such a universal experience.
It really is. Like, why does the most mathematically perfect simulation of a puddle feel completely dead?
Well, it's basically because we have conflated the physics of light with the psychology of human perception.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. So we've allowed a multi-billion-dollar industry to convince us that aesthetic beauty is something you can achieve just by, buying a faster calculator.
Right, just throw more teraflops at it.
Exactly. But the moment you look at that hyper-realistic ray-traced puddle, your subconscious immediately begins searching for the human element,
The human element, like what specifically?
like the subtle, chaotic imperfections of reality that actually resonate with your lived experience. And when it doesn't find them, the illusion violently collapses.
Wow, violently collapses.
It does.
Yeah.
Regardless of how much rendering power is behind it, your brain just says, nope, this is fake.
I mean, for years, the gaming industry has basically trapped us in this endless, exhausting graphics arms race.
Oh, entirely.
We sit through these developer conferences and we are fed this very comforting, very binary narrative.
Right, the numbers game.
Yeah, it's essentially accounting. You look at the spec sheet, you count the polygons, you measure the resolution, and if the numbers are bigger than last year, the marketing team declares that the graphics are, better.
It completely implies a direct linear relationship between the cost of the software and the beauty of the final product, which is, frankly, an incredibly seductive lie.
Because it's easy to market, right?
Exactly. It relies on the assumption that the game engine, the software framework used to build the virtual world, is the primary author of the visual experience.
But we are going to completely dismantle that assumption today on this deep dive.
We have to.
Yeah, we are going to establish a totally different paradigm, one that treats aesthetic creation as a rigorous, almost ruthless science of human psychology.
And there's a core axiom we really have to internalize before we take another step today.
Okay, lay it on me.
The axiom is this: the individual determines the style. The game engine is merely a tool.
I want to stop right there and really drill into that concept. Because if we accept that the individual's mind is the primary engine of beauty, we have to completely redefine what it means for a game to look real.
You have to throw out the old definition completely.
Right, because when I hear the phrase aligning with reality, my immediate instinct is to think of a photograph.
Which is what everyone thinks.
Right. If I'm designing a digital apple, my goal should be to make it indistinguishable from a high-resolution photograph of an apple.
Oh.
If I achieve that one-to-one replica, I've succeeded, right?
That is the exact trap of photorealism. And honestly, it is a massive dead end.
Really, a dead end.
Absolutely. Because think about what a camera actually is. A camera is just a mechanical device.
Hmm?
It captures photons bouncing off a surface at a specific shutter speed.
So it's just data.
Exactly. It is a sterile, objective recording. But human beings do not experience reality objectively. We experience it cognitively and sensorily.
Through our senses and our memories.
Right. Since the moment you were born, you have been building this immense subconscious database of how the physical world behaves.
So it's like, I know what a rock feels like without having to touch it.
Yes.
Yes.
You know instinctively how heavy a dense piece of wood should feel. You know how light diffuses through a thick fog versus like a thin mist.
Right.
You understand the emotional temperature of a deep blue shadow on a snowy morning versus the harsh, stark shadow cast by a fluorescent office light. They feel different.
So it's not about replicating the photon count. It's about triggering that subconscious database. It's about resonance.
Precisely. The term for it is cognitive and sensory resonance. The creator's ultimate job is not to build a mechanical camera simulator.
Okay, so what is their job then?
Their job is to map those deeply ingrained real-world traits into their chosen visual style. And honestly, the style itself is completely irrelevant.
Wait, the style doesn't matter.
Not for this core principle. It can be hyper-realistic, it can be cyberpunk, it can be this exaggerated anime aesthetic.
Okay, so how does that work if it's anime?
The goal is to mathematically and artistically manipulate the pixels on the screen so that they trigger that resonance in the player's brain. You're compelling the player's senses to say, yes, the fundamental logic of this space feels true.
Wait, I struggle a bit with how that applies to highly stylized environments.
Sure, let's unpack that.
Like, if I'm playing a game with cel-shaded graphics, exaggerated character proportions, giant glowing swords, how am I aligning with reality at all?
It seems contradictory, right?
Completely. It contradicts the idea of physical accuracy. If I look at a cel-shaded rock, my brain knows that's not what a rock actually looks like in my backyard.
Let's break down the mechanics of a specific masterpiece of art direction to see how this works. Think about Ghost of Tsushima by Sucker Punch Studios.
Oh, gorgeous game. Absolutely stunning.
It really is. But when you analyze the individual assets in that game, they're not strictly physically accurate.
Really? They looked pretty realistic to me.
They look real, but mathematically. The polygon counts on individual tree leaves aren't setting any world records. A botanist would tell you that the vegetation is technically incorrect.
Okay, so why does it feel so good to look at?
Because the developers weren't trying to align with botanical data. They were aligning with the human sensory expectation of Eastern martial arts romanticism.
Ah.
They were aligning with the cinematography of Akira Kurosawa films.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Like the wind in that game, I remember playing it and feeling like the wind was this tangible, physical entity actually guiding me.
Exactly. The wind is the perfect example. Let's look at the rendering pipeline for that wind.
Yeah, let's get into the tech a bit.
Instead of relying on a standard, chaotic physics simulation to randomly blow leaves around, which is what real wind does.
Right, real wind is just random noise, basically.
Exactly. They didn't do that. They built a highly stylized, unified vector field system. The wind acts as a constant, stylized navigational tool.
So it's always pointing you where to go.
Right. And they coupled this with these oceans of hypersaturated red maple leaves. I mean, colors push far beyond strict physical reality.
Like neon red, almost.
Yeah, it's what we can define as a surreal alignment. It is technically inaccurate to strict physical reality, but it perfectly aligns with the emotional sensory reality of the fantasy they're projecting.
So when I stand in a field of those red leaves, and the wind surges perfectly in the direction of my next objective, my brain doesn't reject it as fake.
No, it accepts it as a heightened poetic truth.
Yeah.
It resonates.
That makes the distinction crystal clear. It feels more real than reality because it hits the emotional subtext of reality.
Perfectly said.
And if we swing to the absolute opposite end of the technological spectrum, I mean, we have to talk about Minecraft.
Oh, Minecraft is the ultimate, undeniable proof of cognitive resonance over graphical fidelity.
Because if you judge Minecraft by the modern spec sheet mentality, it's a total failure.
A catastrophic failure on paper.
Right. It is comprised of abstract, incredibly low-resolution pixel blocks. It looks like a software experiment from 1993.
It does.
Yet it possesses one of the highest levels of sensory alignment in the history of the medium. Kids and adults just get completely lost in it.
And to understand why, we have to look at its core spatial logic. Minecraft operates on a voxel engine.
Right. Voxels, not polygons.
Exactly. The world is built of 3D grid spaces rather than hollow polygons.
Yeah.
Because of this, the physical rules of the world are absolutely rigid and consistent.
Give me an example of those rules.
Think about how gravity interacts with sand versus stone, or how light mathematically attenuates, how it dims as you dig deeper into a cave system.
Oh, yeah. The lighting as you go underground is terrifying because it feels so natural.
Exactly. Or how water physically flows down a gradient. These mechanics perfectly align with the real-world logic of spatial building and survival.
So even though it's blocky, the physics makes sense to my brain.
Right. When you stack stone blocks to build a shelter, your brain entirely accepts the spatial reality, the weight, and the permanence of that structure.
Even though it's covered in like 16 by 16 pixel textures.
Yes. The logic is real, therefore the world is real.
I think of it like the difference between someone who owns a $30,000 Hasselblad camera and someone who owns a 5-year-old smartphone.
That is a fantastic analogy.
Right. Like if I hand that incredibly expensive Hasselblad to an amateur who has never studied composition.
Someone who doesn't understand the rule of thirds.
Yeah. Exactly. Someone who doesn't understand depth of field or the emotional weight of color temperature, they are going to produce high-resolution garbage.
just incredibly crisp garbage.
Right. It will be a remarkably crisp, incredibly detailed, 100-megapixel photograph of absolutely nothing compelling.
Because the tool is merely capturing the operator's lack of vision. It's just doing what it's told.
Exactly. Conversely, a master photographer can take that old smartphone, and because they fundamentally understand how light wraps around a subject's face,
How shadows create drama.
yeah, and how timing captures human emotion, they will produce a piece of profound art. The technological capability of the lens is completely secondary to the individual's internalized accumulation of aesthetic knowledge.
Which completely shatters this marketing illusion we see everywhere today, this idea of technological determinism.
Oh man, we see this constantly. You see a trailer drop, and the entire selling point is just a giant logo that says, powered by Unreal Engine 5.
It implies that the engine is doing the heavy lifting of creation. And we see the devastating results of this mindset in modern canned AAA games.
What do you mean by canned?
Well, studios will utilize out-of-the-box ray tracing algorithms. They will have physically accurate reflections, rendering in every single pane of glass, perfect algorithmic global illumination bouncing off every wall.
Sounds great on paper.
But the resulting environments feel completely soulless. They feel clinical, like a surgical theater.
Yeah, I've played games like that, where everything is so shiny it actually hurts my eyes.
Because the engine is doing exactly what its math dictates. But because the human creator lacked the aesthetic capability to filter, shape, and intentionally corrupt that technology to serve a specific emotional goal, the result is visually exhausting.
So technological determinism falsely assumes that the quality of the brush dictates the emotional impact of the painting.
Exactly. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of art.
So, if simply turning on the most expensive engine features results in a clinical, soulless product, and the true goal is this profound, almost subconscious sensory alignment, how do the actual masters achieve it?
Well, there has to be a methodology.
Right. There has to be a specific workflow that separates the artists from the technicians.
There is, and it is arguably the most critical workflow in all of digital art. We can call it the master craftsman's loop.
Okay, the master craftsman's loop. How does it work?
It is a strictly enforced, closed-loop feedback system. It consists of 4 distinct, uncompromising nodes. Reality, to the individual, to the native tool, to the product.
And I'm guessing if you miss even a fraction of a step here, the whole thing falls apart.
Missing even a fraction of a step breaks the entire chain.
Okay, let's put this under the microscope, starting with node 1. Reality to the individual. This is the intake phase. I imagine this isn't just, looking at reference photos on Google Images.
Far from it. This is the active, deliberate, and often grueling accumulation of reality into the human mind.
Grueling in what way?
Well, imagine the art director. They're standing in a valley at dawn. They aren't just looking at the sky and saying, oh, pretty colors.
Right.
They are analytically studying exactly how Rayleigh scattering, which is the physical dispersion of light by particles in the atmosphere, shifts the sky's color gradient from deep violet to a piercing orange.
Oh, wow. So they're basically studying the physics of the sky in real time.
Exactly. Or take a texture artist. They might be getting down on the pavement after a thunderstorm, closely observing the precise differences in light reflectivity.
Like seeing how a puddle forms?
More than that, looking at the specific roughness and metallic values of wet mud versus soaked asphalt. Because you cannot simulate what you have not deeply personally observed.
So you are building an internal mental library of the physics of the world.
Yes, that is node 1.
Which leads directly into node 2, individual to native tool, the creation phase. And there's a very specific phrasing here in the source text that feels incredibly important. It says the creator must build the tool. It doesn't say use the tool.
This is the great divide in the industry. This is where standard, proficient developers separate themselves from the absolute legends of the medium.
Because the legends don't just use default settings.
Right. Top-tier creators do not simply boot up commercial software like Unreal or Unity, accept the default shading models, and start placing objects. They customize, modify, and frequently rewrite the fundamental mathematical logic of the game engine's core rendering pipeline.
I'm stuck on why that's necessary, though. If I have an engine that accurately simulates how light bounces, why do I need to rewrite the code? Isn't the math of light just, universal?
The math of light is universal, but the emotional intent of the artist is specific.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about a general-purpose commercial engine. It's built to be a jack of all trades. It has to render a sci-fi spaceship just as well as it renders a medieval castle.
Right, it has to do everything okay.
Exactly, which means it relies on averaged, generalized algorithms. But an artist with a specific vision doesn't want average. They need the tool to become native to their specific, nuanced understanding of the reality they're trying to project.
Oh, I see. They have to teach the canvas how to paint their specific picture.
Precisely. They have to force the code to bend to their will.
Okay, so that brings us to node 3. Tool to product, which is the actual rendering of the code into a visual space. But that's not the end, because node 4 is A/B testing or calibration.
And this is the crucible. This is where the obsession lies.
What does this look like in practice?
You render the digital product, and you hold it up, sometimes literally side by side against the real world,
Yeah.
or against your fiercely accumulated mental image of the real world.
Like you literally put a photo next to the screen.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
You interrogate the image. You ask, where does the light bounce in correctly in the corner of the room? Or why does this skin look like wax instead of biological tissue?
And then what?
You identify the mathematical error, and you feed that data all the way back to node 2, rewriting the tool again. It is a grueling, relentless loop of refinement.
I want to ground this in a real-world example because the development of Metal Gear Solid V by Hideo Kojima and Kojima Productions is like a perfect illustration of this exact loop. They built something called the Fox engine.
Oh, the Fox engine.
Yeah.
It remains one of the most phenomenal case studies in rendering history.
Tell me about it.
When Kojima was conceptualizing Metal Gear Solid V, he developed this absolute obsession with a micro-behavior of light intersecting with specific fabrics.
Because the game takes place heavily in the Afghan desert, right?
Exactly. He needed to capture the exact microscopic texture of canvas and distressed leather under harsh, blinding, unmitigated sunlight.
And he looked at the engines available on the market and realized they couldn't mathematically handle that specific interplay of light and shadow.
Right. The existing BRDF algorithms.
Wait, what does BRDF stand for?
Bidirectional reflectance distribution functions. It's the algorithm that dictates how light reflects off an opaque surface.
Okay, got it.
So the BRDF algorithms in commercial engines at the time resulted in fabrics that looked too smooth. They looked too plastic under that specific desert lighting condition.
So what did Kojima's team do?
They built the Fox engine from scratch, writing entirely custom lighting models. But the calibration phase, node 4, is where it gets staggering.
How so?
To do their A/B testing, they didn't just use math. They physically scanned the materials in their actual conference room.
Wait, like the chairs they were sitting on.
Literally. The leather of the chairs, the weave of the carpet, the laminate of the desks, they scanned them all.
That's insane.
They rendered those exact objects within their new engine and conducted intense side-by-side A/B testing against high-resolution photographs of that identical conference room under identical lighting conditions.
So they basically built their office inside the game just to test the light.
Yes. They iterated on the code until the digital render and the physical photograph were completely indistinguishable to the human eye. They forced the engine to match their precise reality.
That is an almost terrifying level of dedication.
But it pays off.
It really does. Another example that always blows my mind, and we have to talk about the biology here, is Naughty Dog and The Last of Us Part 2.
A masterclass.
You look at the characters in that game, and even years after its release, it looks like a magic trick. The characters feel alive in a way that goes beyond just, high polygon models.
It isn't magic, though. It is the strict, uncompromising adherence to the master craftsman's loop.
How did Naughty Dog do it?
Well, their technical artists didn't just sculpt good-looking faces. They engaged in a profound observation of human anatomy.
Okay.
They looked at the human eye and realized that standard engine rendering, which usually treats an eyeball as a simple, shiny white sphere, was entirely insufficient for conveying deep human emotion.
Because an eye isn't just a shiny ball, it's biological machinery.
Precisely. The eye has a cornea, a layer of fluid, an iris that sits behind that fluid, and the sclera. Light doesn't just bounce off it. It refracts through the moisture.
So standard light bouncing just wouldn't look right?
No, it looks dead. So Naughty Dog went into their rendering pipeline and wrote a custom caustic algorithm specifically for the eye.
Caustics, right, like the patterns at the bottom of a pool?
Exactly. Caustics are the complex patterns of light that occur when light rays are reflected or refracted by a curved surface. They program the engine to calculate how light hits the moisture on the surface of the eye, cools at the bottom lid, and refracts into the iris.
They wrote a specific physics simulation just for the moisture on a character's eyeball. That is wild.
They did. Furthermore, they integrated deeply advanced subsurface scattering algorithms for the skin.
Subsurface scattering, that's like when light goes through something semi-transparent, right?
Yes, it calculates how light penetrates a translucent surface, scatters beneath it, and exits at a different point. It's why your ear glows red when a flashlight is held behind it.
Right, right.
Naughty Dog calculated this not just globally, but dynamically based on the thickness of the skin and the simulation of blood flow beneath it. They tailored their native tool to match an obsessive intake of biological reality.
That is just phenomenal. But this loop isn't just reserved for gritty, hyper-realistic games, is it?
Not at all.
Because the exact same topology applies to highly stylized, non-realistic art, like Nintendo's The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild.
That is a crucial point. People think this is only for photorealism, but Nintendo wanted Breath of the Wild to feel like a living, breathing painting.
And it absolutely does.
To achieve this, they created a completely bespoke volumetric cloud and lighting system. But during their A/B testing phase, their calibration, they weren't comparing their digital clouds to photographs of real cumulus clouds.
What were they comparing them to?
They were executing their A/B testing against plein air oil paintings. Yeah. They calibrated their rendering algorithms until the virtual sunlight diffused through the volumetric fog exactly like the painted cells of a Studio Ghibli film. The loop is the exact same. The reality they were aligning with was just the physical medium of oil on canvas.
That is so cool, which brings us to a really harsh, uncomfortable truth, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Because if building and modifying native tools is the absolute pinnacle of this art form, yielding these masterpieces, what is happening to the broader industry today? Because it feels like fewer and fewer studios are actually doing this.
It is a modern tragedy, to be honest, and it's driven almost entirely by corporate economics.
Right, the bottom line.
Massive AAA studios are actively losing the institutional knowledge required to reinvent the wheel. Building a proprietary engine takes years, takes tens of millions of dollars.
And executives hate that.
Exactly. So to save time and appease shareholders, studios are abandoning their bespoke native tools. They're fully capitulating to commercial one-size-fits-all engines like Unreal and Unity.
I want to understand the exact danger there. If Unreal Engine 5 is incredibly powerful, which it is, what is the actual artistic loss of using it instead of a custom engine?
The danger is that the creator's upper limits are no longer dictated by their imagination. They are entirely locked by the engine developer's APIs.
The application programming interfaces.
Right. If Epic Games, the makers of Unreal, didn't write the specific mathematical feature you need for your artistic vision, you simply do not get that feature.
You're just out of luck.
The dynamic is inverted. Instead of the individual dominating the tool and forcing it to bend to their will, the tool dominates the individual.
So you have to compromise your art to fit the software.
Yes. Creators are forced to castrate their own cognitive reality, compromising their vision to appease the hard-coded limitations of the software. We are trading bespoke, visionary masterpieces for mass-produced, generalized proficiency.
Man, that's bleak. So if building native tools requires this immense, grueling mental library, and we're seeing studios simply abandon that process, what happens when a developer doesn't have the time, the budget, or frankly, the talent to build that library in the first place?
That is where things get really messy.
Right. This brings us to a fascinating, deeply destructive pathology in the industry. Let's call it aesthetic takeism, or what gamers usually call asset flipping.
It is the defining disease of the modern digital storefront.
Okay, define the pathology of takeism for us.
So, when creators lack the innate talent, and more importantly, the hard-earned, accumulated aesthetic experience to translate real-world observation into a cohesive vision, panic sets in.
They realize they're in over their heads.
They stare at a blank digital canvas and realize they literally don't know how to paint, so they look for a shortcut.
They want the prestige of the finish line without the grueling agony of running the race.
Exactly. So they bypass Node 1 entirely. They completely skip the observation of reality. Instead, they directly steal, purchase, or blindly apply other people's tool parameters, pre-made material shaders, and high-resolution asset libraries from online marketplaces.
But logically, let me play devil's advocate here. If I buy a highly detailed, professionally modeled 3D car and I put it in my game, shouldn't my game look good? Why does this approach fail on a fundamental mathematical level? Why does it create this severe misalignment?
Okay, let's look at the math of a material shader. A shader isn't just a color. It's a complex set of instructions telling the engine how light should interact with the surface.
Okay, so it's code.
Yes. When you buy a pre-made asset, its shaders and parameters were written by a different engineer based on their personal, highly specific understanding of reality designed for a specific lighting scenario.
So it's custom built for their world, not Maya.
Exactly. When a low aesthetic individual simply copy-pastes that asset into their own game, the engine attempts to reconcile the lighting logic of the purchased asset with the lighting logic of the current world.
And I'm guessing they clash.
They inevitably clash. The light bounces wrong. The reflections are scaled incorrectly. The creator is attempting to speak a highly complex language they have never actually learned.
Taking standard lighting parameters and applying them to a custom post-apocalyptic world is like trying to use a map of New York to navigate Tokyo.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The streets might look similar on paper. They both have grids, they both have intersections, but the underlying logic, the scale, the cultural flow of the architecture is totally incompatible. If you just follow the map, you're going to crash into a wall.
That is an excellent way to frame it. Another perfect analogy from the source text is the master chef versus the microwave.
Oh, I love this one. Let's hear it.
A true master chef, representing the aesthetic artist, uses raw ingredients and fire. They understand the complex chemical Maillard reaction that occurs when heat hits a specific marbled cut of beef. They control the process.
They understand the underlying physics of the food.
Exactly. A bad chef, the takeist, simply buys commercial, pre-made frozen meals and puts them in a high-powered microwave.
Right.
The menu at both restaurants might say beef Wellington, but the microwave meal lacks the crucial active intervention of the chef's understanding of the raw ingredients. The soul of the dish is dead on arrival.
And we have seen catastrophic, highly publicized industry failures that perfectly illustrate this exact pathology. Let's talk about the epic collapse of The Day Before.
Oh, The Day Before. It is the ultimate, inescapable manifestation of takeism.
For those who don't know, what happened with that game?
The development team essentially went on the Unreal Engine marketplace and purchased highly detailed, incredibly high-fidelity 3D assets. They bought incredibly realistic city buildings, meticulously modeled vehicles, highly detailed character outfits.
So the individual puzzle pieces were objectively high quality.
Yes, but here is where the absolute lack of the reality-to-individual link destroyed the game. They completely lacked the unifying color space, the global illumination knowledge, and the weathering logic to bind those disparate assets together.
Explain what you mean by weathering logic computationally.
Weathering logic is how environmental decay applies consistently across a 3D space. If a virtual city has been abandoned for 10 years, dust must settle in the crevices of the geometry based on ambient occlusion algorithms.
So dust shouldn't just be randomly placed.
Right, it has to follow physical rules. Rust must form on metallic surfaces based on their exposure to virtual moisture. The developers of The Day Before lacked the skill to write global shaders that applied this logic.
So what did the game actually look like?
The result was utterly absurd. You would have a perfectly reflective, pristine, showroom-quality sports car with mathematically perfect clear-coat reflections parked on a supposedly post-apocalyptic ruined street covered in low-resolution trash.
Oh, man. That's hilarious, but also terrible.
The car had no dust on the tires, no logical weathering. The global lighting clashed with the baked-in lighting of the purchased assets. When you combine high-resolution assets without a tyrannical, overriding aesthetic logic, you don't get a beautiful game. You create high-resolution visual garbage.
It's visual dissonance. Your brain sees the pristine car and the ruined street, and the subconscious immediately flags the entire scene as a fake, artificial construct.
Immediately.
And we see this exact same phenomenon on a smaller scale every single day. If you open Steam right now and look at the flood of indie horror games, they all look completely identical.
The Steam UE5 asset flips. It is an epidemic of homogenization.
Why do they all look exactly the same?
Because these developers are blindly applying Unreal Engine 5's flagship features without understanding the underlying math. They turn on Lumen, which is Epic's dynamic global illumination system,
Right.
and they turn on Nanite, which is their virtualized geometry system.
Right.
And they combine these with default post-process volumes and pre-made Quixel Megaskin textures.
Let's break those down. What is Nanite actually doing, and why does lazily applying it make a game look bad?
Nanite is a brilliantly complex system. Traditionally, a 3D model has a set number of polygons, and as you get further away, the engine swaps it out for a lower detail model to save memory.
LODs, right. level of detail.
Exactly. Nanite throws that out. It streams virtualized micropolygons directly from the hard drive to the GPU, allowing for theoretically infinite detail without traditional rendering bottlenecks.
That sounds amazing, though.
It is. But if an artist just dumps raw, unoptimized photogrammetry scans like Quixel megascans of rocks and trees into a scene without carefully adjusting their material roughness or organizing their macro composition, the engine renders all of it with perfectly equal priority.
Oh, I see. So the eye doesn't know where to look. Everything is screaming for attention.
Precisely. It's visual overload.
And what happens when you combine that visual overload with Lumen?
Well, Lumen calculates how light bounces off surfaces dynamically. But if you haven't tuned the physical properties of your materials, Lumen will bounce light off a rock exactly the same way it bounces light off a plastic chair.
And what does that actually look like to the player?
The visual result of this blind application is highly specific. It looks plastic. It looks lifeless. It has this distinct greasy look where every surface seems slightly wet or oily.
I know exactly what you mean, the shiny indie horror hallway.
Exactly. The lighting is technically bouncing correctly according to the algorithm, but the materials lack the human touch of art direction to give them proper, varied texture and grit. It is perfectly lit plastic.
This leads us to a really brutal reality check regarding how we talk about game development today. Because for the last decade, the industry has praised this exact ecosystem, giving everyone access to Unreal Engine for free as the democratization of game development.
It is a fundamentally flawed premise.
Why is it flawed?
Giving everyone access to a world-class game engine democratizes access to the software. It absolutely does not democratize aesthetic ability.
Because you can't just download taste.
You cannot download taste. You cannot patch in an understanding of color theory. The highly packaged, incredibly user-friendly nature of modern engines is acting as a massive fig leaf for fundamental incompetence.
Oh, fig leaf. Wow.
It is. It's resulting in what the industry now derisively calls the Unreal Engine look, a homogenized plastic patina covering modern games. It is the desecration of the medium as a visual art form.
We look at that Unreal Engine look and we call it visual garbage.
Yeah.
But I want to put on my lab coat here for a second.
Let's do it.
I want to know the exact biological and computational reasons why my brain rejects that pristine car in the ruined city or that greasy, overlit horror game. What actually breaks down at the pixel level?
To understand this, we need to conduct a forensic autopsy of a visual disaster, analyzing what we can call the 5 pillars of collapse.
Okay, the 5 pillars.
This is where the abstract philosophy becomes hard, unyielding technical reality. If a developer lacks aesthetic accumulation, the failure will inevitably manifest in one or all of these 5 pillars. Let's break them down mathematically and visually.
Let's start with pillar number 1, which is lighting. I think most people assume lighting is just putting a digital sun in the sky and letting the computer draw the shadows.
That assumption is exactly why so many games look terrible. Real lighting in the physical world is astonishingly complex.
How complex are we talking?
It relies on global illumination, which calculates multi-bounce indirect light. Think about this. When sunlight hits a red carpet, it doesn't just stop. It bounces off the carpet, carrying that red wavelength, and illuminates the white ceiling with a subtle pink hue.
Oh, right, color bounce.
Yes, it involves ambient occlusion, calculating how light struggles to reach into the microscopic tight corners of a brick wall, creating deep, soft microshadows. And it requires calculating atmospheric scattering, how photons physically interact with suspended dust, moisture, and pollen in the air volume.
So how does a hack developer handle lighting if they don't know all that?
Hacks bypass all that computational nuance.
Yeah.
They just drop a stark, pure white directional light into the scene, essentially a giant digital flashlight.
Just point and shoot.
Basically. Because they don't understand bounce lighting, the areas not directly hit by the flashlight are rendered as pitch black, razor-sharp shadows. They look like shadows on the surface of the moon, completely devoid of atmosphere.
That harsh, stark contrast.
Yeah, they completely fail to observe that in reality, even in shadow, a blue skybox will cast a subtle, ambient purple-blue bounce light into the darkest corners. Without that ambient bounce, the lighting feels fundamentally dead to the human eye.
Which bleeds directly into pillar number 2, color. And this isn't just about picking a nice shade of green for the grass, is it?
Not at all. Authentic color in a rendering engine relies heavily on color temperature, measured in Kelvin, and material absorption spectra.
Okay, color temperature.
Yeah, an object physically looks different under a warm 2700 Kelvin incandescent bulb versus a cold 6000 Kelvin fluorescent tube. Hacks, however, completely ignore color wheel theory.
They don't know the rules.
They don't understand the psychological impacts of complementary colors, like
Yeah.
using a warm orange light to contrast a deep teal shadow or analogous colors.
I definitely noticed this in a lot of amateur games. Everything just looks loud.
Because their only concept of better is more. They go into the texture settings and simply crank the RGB values to maximum saturation.
They think maximum color equals maximum graphics.
The result is eye-straining visual pollution. It's like someone standing an inch from your face and screaming into a microphone. There's no harmony, no visual hierarchy, just competing frequencies of neon noise that completely exhaust the retina.
Wow. Okay, pillar number 3 is structure. When I hear structure, I immediately think of architecture. But it's broader than that, right?
Much broader. Structure encompasses the macro composition of a scene, the microanatomy of a character model, and the physical load-bearing logic of the environment.
Let's talk about characters first.
If a creator hasn't spent hundreds of hours observing physical reality, their character rigs will move like marionettes. Why? Because they don't understand the weight distribution of human bone, or how muscle mass dynamically flexes and deforms under the skin during movement.
And environmentally, how does structure fail there?
Environmentally, their buildings look like paper models that would instantly collapse under their own weight.
Oh, like a pillar that isn't actually holding anything up.
Exactly. They place structural support pillars randomly, purely for decoration, rather than where physics dictates they must exist to support a ceiling.
But players aren't structural engineers. Do we really notice that?
The human brain subconsciously calculates physics constantly. When you walk into a virtual room and the structural logic defies gravity, the brain instantly flags the space as artificial, plunging the entire game straight into the uncanny valley. The brain knows it's wrong, even if the player can't articulate exactly why the ceiling looks fake.
That makes a lot of sense. That brings us to Pillar 4, which is arguably the most misunderstood aspect of next-gen graphics today: detail. There's a massive misconception that detail just means adding more lines, more bumps, more stuff, but detail is not noise.
This is a critical distinction that separates professionals from amateurs. Amateurs think that turning up the intensity sliders on normal maps and displacement maps equals detail.
Let's clarify those terms for the listeners. What are those maps actually doing?
A normal map is a texture trick that uses RGB color data to tell the lighting engine to fake the appearance of microscopic bumps and dents on a flat surface.
Okay.
A displacement map physically alters the geometry, pushing polygons up and down to create real depth. Amateurs will crank these maps to 100%.
Just max them out.
They make every single brick look like a jagged, highly porous sponge. They make smooth leather look like it has the texture of gravel.
Because they think if I can see every pore, it must be next gen.
Exactly. But real aesthetic detail is logical. It is driven by weathering and wear and tear.
What does logical detail look like?
It's the specific scuff marks on a wooden door frame, exactly at the height where hands push it open. It's the dirt procedurally pooling only in the deep crevices of a cobblestone street where the rain washes it, while the peaks of the stones remain polished clean by foot traffic.
So it tells a story.
Yes, algorithmic, random detail applied uniformly across a surface without visual flow doesn't look realistic. It just creates a chaotic, noisy mess that exhausts the eye's ability to focus.
And finally, Pillar 5, content or environmental storytelling.
This is the final layer of human resonance. An amateur looks at an empty virtual room and just places 3D props randomly to fill the void.
Let's put a barrel in this corner, a crate over here, maybe a generic poster on the wall.
Right. But a master artist places a prop specifically to imply human history. A knocked-over chair, a coffee cup left dangerously close to the edge of a desk, a specific pattern of scuff marks on the linoleum floor.
These spatial elements tell a subconscious story about the people who exist in that reality.
Without that implied history, the space is just a sterile, mathematically perfect 3D void.
There is a brutal mathematical formula from the source material that perfectly summarizes this autopsy.
Oh, the multiplication formula.
Yes. These 5 flaws, bad lighting, toxic color, broken structure, noisy detail, and sterile content, they don't just add up. They multiply.
They compound on each other.
Right. If your aesthetic talent, your fundamental artistic taste is 0, and you multiply it by the absolute most advanced game engine in the world, 0 times anything is still 0. The output is still visual garbage.
It's an unforgiving equation, and that we can look at 2 massive high-profile case studies where this exact collapse occurred. Let's look at the GTA Trilogy Definitive Edition.
Oh man, that was a rough launch. It felt like they took classic games and just fed them into a shredder.
Because that is functionally what they did. The developers relied on an AI upscaler, Literally a convoluted neural network, which is someone else's algorithmic tool to increase the resolution of the original classic textures.
Okay, so they let an AI do the work.
But they deployed this AI without rigorous human aesthetic oversight. The result was a catastrophic structural and macro-compositional collapse.
Break down exactly what the AI ruined.
Let's look at the rain. In the original games, rain was a subtle atmospheric effect blended into the lighting. The AI, not understanding transparency or atmospheric depth, upscaled the rain textures into blinding, solid white lines that physically obscured the screen.
That's a total lighting collapse.
Exactly. Then, the neural network tried to add high-resolution detail to character faces. But because it didn't understand human anatomy, it distorted the underlying facial bones, making characters look like mutant caricatures.
A structural collapse.
Yes. And the iconic, hazy, warm, sunset orange color filter that defined the emotional tone of Los Santos was entirely erased, replaced with a stark, sterile lighting model. A total color collapse.
So they applied high-tech tools and completely destroyed the artistic soul of the game.
They absolutely did.
Another fascinating example is of Forspoken. This was a massive AAA title from Square Enix, backed by a huge budget.
Forspoken is an incredible negative proof because it utilized the top-tier Luminous engine. On a micro level, the technology was staggering.
The particles were amazing.
The particle effects for the magic spells were computationally brilliant. The microtextures on the rocks and the main character's clothing were incredibly high resolution. But the art direction, the macro composition, was severely lacking.
So the engine was performing perfectly, but the human input failed. What did that look like to the player?
The result was a muddy, lifeless, yellow-brown world. Despite having incredible micro detail, the developers failed to implement macro color contrast.
So everything just blended together.
There was no visual hierarchy to separate the character from the background or the enemies from the terrain. When everything is highly detailed but shares the exact same muddy color palette, the human eye cannot parse the information.
The game became a visual blur.
It proved definitively that raw rendering power cannot save poor art direction.
I think the audio mixing analogy perfectly crystallizes this. Taking someone with zero aesthetic accumulation and giving them Unreal Engine 5 is exactly like taking someone who has zero musical theory, zero ear for melody, and sitting them down at $1 million mixing desk in professional recording studio.
Then what do? They just push every single instrument's fader up to absolute maximum volume.
Right. They push the drums to max, the bass to max, the vocals to max. They look at the meters hitting the red and they think, this is epic, it's loud, it's powerful.
But the actual output is just ear-piercing white noise.
Because they don't understand the art of silence. They don't understand frequency blending, rolling off the low end of the guitar so the bass can actually be heard. They just know how to turn the volume up.
And this triggers a desperately needed critique of how the gaming industry evaluates visual quality overall.
Yeah, how so?
We have been conditioned, almost brainwashed, by hardware manufacturers to believe that 4K resolution plus 60 frames per second plus 8K textures automatically equals good graphics.
It's just numbers on a box.
It is a fundamental lie. Human psychology prioritizes global lighting, spatial composition, and color harmony first. Microdetail comes dead last.
That's a great point.
What we are experiencing in many modern games is aesthetic degradation brought on by resolution inflation. The images are mathematically sharper than they have ever been, but emotionally, they are uglier than ever.
If giving an amateur a high-resolution tool simply allows them to create high-resolution garbage, then this deeply entrenched industry belief that good tool equals good game is completely bankrupt. This brings us to a concept we need to deconstruct, the fallacy of technological determinism.
We have to dismantle this illusion completely. The argument here is that game engines are merely enablers. They're calculators, and calculators are entirely dependent on valid input.
Right, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. Let's look closely at the PBR system, physically based rendering. This is the absolute standard for modern graphics rendering.
How does PBR work?
To make a material look physically real, the PBR shader requires 3 distinct mathematically correct maps. First, the albedo map, which is the flat base color without any lighting data.
Okay, the base color.
Second, the roughness map, which dictates the microsurface structure and determines how blurry or sharp a reflection is.
So how shiny it is.
And third, the metallic map, which tells the engine if the surface conducts electricity and therefore reflects light, like a metal or a dielectric material.
It sounds foolproof, honestly. It's literally just plugging in the physics.
But what happens when the human operating the system fails? If a creator, lacking a basic observation of physical reality, takes a wooden door asset and accidentally or ignorantly assigns it a high metallic value, the advanced engine doesn't correct them.
It just does what it's told.
It obediently, flawlessly processes the math.
Yeah.
It will perfectly render an incredibly jarring, physically impossible object, a piece of wood that shines and reflects light exactly like polished chrome.
That would look so wrong.
The engine does the math flawlessly, which only serves to make the human error more glaringly obvious. The better, more accurate the tool is, the worse the amateur's mistake looks.
So why is this fallacy so popular? If the tools so easily expose incompetence, why do millions of aspiring developers and gamers constantly fall for the idea that the engine is the magic bullet?
It is entirely driven by the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it is weaponized by engine manufacturers through tech demos.
Demos, yeah.
When a company like Epic Games releases a staggering tech demo like The Matrix Awakens, that demo is not made by your average indie developer.
No, it's made by an army of experts.
It is meticulously crafted by Epic's absolute best world-class master artists. These are the top 0.1% of aesthetic accumulators in the world.
But an amateur sees that demo, experiences the Dunning-Kruger effect, where they vastly overestimate their own competence, and they falsely attribute the breathtaking beauty of the demo to the software itself, rather than the lifetime of artistic mastery possessed by the human who built it.
They think, if I just download UE5, my game will automatically look like The Matrix.
Which is just not true.
Not even close.
Yeah.
And we have definitive proofs, both positive and negative, that completely shattered this illusion.
Let's look at a glorious positive proof. Valheim.
I could talk about Valheim for hours. From a pure spec sheet perspective, it shouldn't work.
According to the tech-first crowd, Valheim should be an ugly game. The developers used the basic Unity engine. They intentionally used PS1-era, low-polygon 3D models. They used highly pixelated, mosaic textures.
It flies in the face of every modern graphical standard.
But when you play it, it is genuinely breathtaking. The atmosphere is heavier and more immersive than almost anything else on the market.
Why is that?
Because Valheim is the ultimate proof of the equation. Simple tool plus masterful aesthetics equals top-tier graphics. The developers utilized extreme aesthetic accumulation to perfect the exact elements that actually matter to human psychology.
Like the lighting.
Yes, they nailed the volumetric fog density. They perfected the color temperature of the day and night cycles. When you are sailing a boat and the virtual sun sets through the low-poly trees, casting long, mathematically simple but emotionally perfect shadows across the water, the emotional impact utterly crushes 90% of ultra-realistic, ray-traced UE5 titles.
They focus on the macro composition, not the micro detail.
Another brilliant positive proof is Hollow Knight, a tiny indie team. They completely ignored 3D next-gen features, no ray tracing, no KBR materials, just pure 2D hand-drawn art.
Pure artistry.
But because the artists possessed an incredible, deeply internalized understanding of Gothic architectural flow, spatial composition, and stark color contrast, they created absolute, undeniable immersion.
And then we must bring down the hammer with the ultimate negative proof. Sony's Conquered.
Ooh, the commercial apocalypse.
It is the defining cautionary tale of this entire generation. Sony spent hundreds of millions of dollars over 8 years developing Conquered.
And technologically, it was flawless, right?
From a purely technical standpoint, the game had top-tier motion capture, pristine PBR material rendering, flawless engine tech. The tools were unparalleled.
So what went wrong?
Yet, the core character silhouettes, the clashing color palettes, and the fundamental clothing aesthetics were abysmal. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar showcase of negative aesthetic accumulation.
And the market rejected it instantly.
It was an unprecedented commercial failure. It proved, unequivocally, that the greatest technical tools on Earth, running on the most powerful hardware, cannot save a game from fundamentally ugly art direction.
The conclusion here is brutal. It essentially states that algorithms can never generate taste. Believing that good tools equal good graphics reduces the profound act of artistic creation to mere data entry.
It reduces the artist to a typist. There's a quote from the legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins that is highly relevant here.
What's the quote?
Deakins is known for frequently breaking physical lighting rules, placing massive cinematic lights in positions where they couldn't possibly exist in reality, deliberately violating the physics of the scene.
Why would he do that?
Specifically to create a heightened emotional resonance. He forces the light to serve the story, rather than letting the physics dictate the emotion.
And a computer can't do that.
No. Giving super tools to tasteless people is like putting a monkey in a spaceship. It doesn't magically turn the monkey into an astronaut. It just ensures the ship is going to violently self-destruct on the launch pad.
Okay, take a breath. We have covered a massive amount of ground today on this deep dive.
We really have.
We've established the mathematics of light, we've explored the psychology of human perception, and we've walked through the visual disasters of asset flipping. We are at the final precipice. Based on everything we've analyzed, what is the uncompromising final solution to this industry crisis?
The author of the manifesto does not pull punches. The ultimate conclusion is a harsh, gatekeeping reality. Individuals without innate talent and rigorously acquired aesthetic accumulation should simply not touch the field of game graphics.
Look, I have to challenge that. In today's industry climate, where democratization is the buzzword, isn't that incredibly elitist? Isn't it arrogant to explicitly state that certain people just shouldn't be allowed to make art?
The argument vehemently defends this exclusivity, and it grounds it in the unforgiving realities of commercial game development.
Let's hear the defense, then.
Consider the biological bandwidth of the player. Graphics take up roughly 80% of a player's sensory bandwidth. The visual layer is the literal face of the game. It is the primary vessel for narrative and emotional connection.
Okay, that's true.
If a game has a bug in its netcode, you can release a patch. If the gameplay math weapon damage, enemy health is unbalanced, you can tweak the stats in a server-side update.
You can fix it after launch.
But you cannot patch a fundamentally ugly foundational aesthetic.
Because it's baked into the bones of the game, it's structural.
It is a genetic defect in the game's code. If the lighting algorithms are structured wrong, if the global color palette is dissonant, if the character proportions are rooted in the uncanny valley, the only way to fix it is to throw millions of dollars away and remake the game from scratch.
So you have to get it right the first time.
Therefore, the argument asserts that stripping decision-making power away from unartistic, technically minded operators is not malice or elitism. It is the only scientifically and financially viable way to protect a multi-million-dollar project from self-destruction.
And the industry provides massive evidence of this, working in what we might call aesthetic dictatorships. The most prominent example is Hidetaka Miyazaki and From Software, specifically looking at Elden Ring.
Elden Ring is the perfect case study. If you listen to technical engine bros on forums, they will endlessly mock From Software's proprietary engine.
Yeah, they complain about the tech all the time.
They complain that it's mathematically a decade behind Western studios.
Yeah.
It has clunky physics, lower resolution textures, no advanced ray tracing integration.
Yet, universally, by critics and players alike, it is considered the absolute ceiling of modern art direction.
How do they achieve that dominance using supposedly inferior tech?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because Miyazaki and his art directors operate an absolute unyielding dictatorship. Their internal aesthetic accumulation regarding dark fantasy is immense.
They know exactly what they want.
They strictly, uncompromisingly control the macro scale of the Gothic architecture, the precise color temperature of every single zone to invoke specific feelings of dread or awe, and the visual narrative of environmental decay.
So there's no room for technical compromise.
If From Software operated as a democracy, if they let the engine tech engineers run the visual department to prioritize the newest, shiniest rendering tricks over the art direction, the studio's unique, melancholic soul would have been erased long ago.
It's not just massive studios that benefit from this dictatorship either. We see it on the solo developer level. Look at Eric Barone, the sole creator of Stardew Valley.
This is a crucial example because Barone wasn't a natural-born savant at pixel art.
No, his early stuff was pretty rough.
If you look at the early drafts of Stardew Valley, the art was rough. But he profoundly understood the absolute necessity of aesthetic accumulation. He refused to take the easy way out.
He could have just bought assets.
He explicitly refused to use asset flips or buy pre-made sprites to save time. Instead, he spent 4 grueling years drawing pixel art daily. He redrew the character portraits dozens of times.
So he was a dictator over himself.
He acted as a dictator over his own work, gatekeeping himself. He refused to release the game until his internal aesthetic accumulation evolved to meet his own incredibly high standards. He did the grueling work of observation and iteration.
It reminds me of the architecture analogy. In the real world, we would never ever let someone without a rigorous degree in structural engineering and architectural aesthetics design a 50-story skyscraper just because they bought a copy of AutoCAD software.
We universally understand that the software tool doesn't make the architect,
So why, in the gaming industry, do we assume that buying Unreal Engine automatically makes someone an art director? The conclusion here is that game development must reestablish a barrier to entry based entirely on aesthetic power, not just software operation power.
And this is the climax of the argument. It praises the bravery of establishing these harsh boundaries.
Ah,
We live in a cultural era obsessed with the idea of inclusivity in all things.
right.
But the commercial art market remains brutal, objective, and unforgiving. The true job of an art director is not to make friends, is to be a dictator and a filter.
The filter against what?
Their explicit job is to physically and structurally separate the button-pushing tech operators from the core visual decision-making process. If an individual cannot deeply observe reality, internalize it, and translate it into a resonant visual style, they simply do not get to dictate the aesthetic of the world.
We have been on an immense journey today. We started by completely redefining what good visuals actually are. It's not the sterile math of photorealism, it is the deeply human psychology of sensory alignment.
It's a total paradigm shift.
We praised the grueling, uncompromising master craftsman's loop of building bespoke, native tools to bend the math to the artist's will. We mourned the homogenized, plastic era of asset flips and the pathology of takeism.
And we proved, using the hard mathematics of lighting and rendering, that pure technology cannot buy taste.
And finally, we validated the harsh but absolutely necessary reality of artistic gatekeeping to protect the medium.
It is a radical, almost aggressive framework. But once you begin to view video games and all digital media through this specific lens of human aesthetic accumulation versus sterile technological determinism, you can never unsee it.
It changes everything.
You will start to see the cracks in the plastic everywhere. You will see the math failing to hide the lack of a human soul.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. The next time you look at a truly stunning video game, or a breathtaking frame of a movie, or even a magnificent piece of physical architecture out in your city, stop yourself from asking the tech bro question.
Don't ask about the software.
Exactly. Don't ask what software did they use to make this or what engine is this running on. That's the accountant's question. Instead, ask yourself, what profound part of human reality did this creator observe, internalize, and map out so perfectly that it made my brain instinctively resonate with it?
Find the human element beneath the pixels. That is where true art lives.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive, uncompromising deep dive into the philosophy and mathematics of digital aesthetics. We encourage you to keep looking deeper at the visual world around you, because the truth is that perfect, high-resolution, mathematically flawless white line on the X-ray, it might tell you the bone is broken, but it takes an artist to tell you how it feels. See you next time.